CD listeners. Welcome to Topline, everybody. We've got a special guest. It's me, Sam Jacobs, AJ Bruno, CEO of QuotaPath, Asad Zaman, CEO of Sales Talent Agency. And we've got a very special guest, Kathleen Booth, SVP of Marketing and Growth for Pavilion, LinkedIn influencer, resident of Annapolis, Maryland, owner of 2 dogs and 1 teenager, and the MC for the CMO Summit that we hosted last week, which was a smash success. Kathleen, welcome to our estimable show.
Thank you, Sam. I wish I could say I owned my son, but I'm pretty sure he owns me at this point. He's like the boss of the house. So.
Kathleen, what age does that happen? Like, is that a quick turn?
It's like around when he gets his driver's license, and then all of a sudden he gets priority for the car. Okay. I'm stuck at home with no transportation. So I now call him Wyatt Cart, because instead of Instacart, I'm like messaging him saying, stop at Sam's Club and pick stuff up for me because I have no vehicle. So.
He gets the car? That doesn't seem right.
Well, I mean, I work from home and I don't really go that many places.
In my house as well.
Keep digging those ditches that he was digging that one summer so that he can buy his own damn car.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Man, and make him a listener of Topline so Sam can give him direct feedback.
I've got a lot of direct feedback for a lot of different people. Got some feedback for you today, AJ.
Oh, boy. Oh, my God.
Welcome to Topline, the podcast for the best founders, operators, and investors in B2B tech. Every week, AJ Bruno, Asad Zaman, and me, Sam Jacobs, will break down what's important for you to know to be the most well-informed professionals in the market. What do the revenue leaders at Google, 3M, IBM, Shopify, Square, and Cisco have in common? Their teams all use SalesLoft to hit their number. SalesLoft is the only platform that's designed for the way revenue teams work every day, so sellers can prioritize and take the right actions to get more deals done. From prospecting and deal management to coaching and forecasting. No more guesswork, no more wasted time on non-selling activities. Follow SalesLoft on LinkedIn to learn more.
Oh, man. Ever since that episode, I had a printed out list of grievances. Sam has been waiting for his time.
Asad, why don't you kick us off? Frame it out for us.
Okay, so we have a really interesting discussion, something that we don't discuss enough in our ecosystem, but it's fun that we are going to be discussing it, which is the various paths into the CRO role. I believe at the CMO Summit, there was a conversation around the CMO to CRO path, which is really interesting. We've had Andrea Hale on the podcast, and that's her path. And she's been very successful transitioning from CMO to CRO. And you can see the strengths that you have when you make that transition. But the common paths into the CRO have traditionally been a sales track. And it really does beg the question that what is the ideal path? And it feels like we're in this live experiment. We're in the middle of this live experiment, figuring out what's the right way to structure a go-to-market team, lead a go-to-market team, who should lead it, what are the pros and cons of people from various paths. And so since this conversation was happening at the CMO Summit, but all our listeners weren't there, we thought we'd have Kathleen join us and be able to have this conversation for everyone else. So, Kathleen, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what were people talking about at the CMO Summit about this topic, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because we have a lot of members in our community that are pretty tenured at this point. They're successful, they've grown companies as heads of marketing, and they've like reached what they thought maybe initially was the goal. And now they're thinking about what's next. What's the next big goal I can set for myself? And for some of them, it's going to even bigger companies. And for some, it's get out and become a board advisor. And for others, it perhaps might be going into a CRO role. And so we actually had one panel all about what's next and kind of covered those different options. And then we had a couple of speakers who have made the transition, including, as you mentioned, Andrea Kale, but also Latany Kanant at 6 Sense. And I think for table setting purposes, first, we probably need to start with like, putting a little definition around what we mean by CRO, because I know that there's some hot debate. Like when I raised this in the channel of the CMOs at Pavilion, they were like, oh, are we also going to debate what CROs should actually oversee? Like, are they just literally the senior most salesperson in the company, or do they run sales, marketing, and CS? And I think if I'm guessing correctly, we're talking about the latter here. Yes?
Yes, I think so, because...
Well, I don't think we know. That's sort of part of the debate is, that was in the Topline Slack channel. It was Ryan Burke saying, hey, glad we didn't go down a rabbit hole of figuring out what a CRO is actually supposed to own.
Do it now, Ryan.
Yes.
But I do, that's my understanding is like the origin of the title. I feel like I first heard about it from advertising and media businesses. And the point was that the CRO...
What year was that, Sam, by the way?
It's got to be like late 90s.
Okay.
I don't think the title is that old. It's not.
I didn't hear about it until like 2010, 2011. But
that's what I was going to say. Yeah,
I was working
that's
for
when it made its way into SaaS. Is from my experience exactly.
Okay.
Is right around 2010.
Makes
and the
sense.
point is like it was supposed to be a thing that owned marketing, like it owned sales and marketing, and then it became a thing that really was just glorified head of sales and higher paid than the CMO. And then there was like gender dynamics because it was more often a man and the CMO was more often a woman. And that also was like a little bit of a weirdness. So I guess like if I were to frame it out, like, well, it's especially in Andrea and Latney's case, it's like clear that they're not giving up on marketing. They're inheriting sales. That's what like I assume it to mean.
Do they have customer success too, like post sales?
I know that Latney does. One of the reasons she can't be on the show right now is because she's handling end of quarter for and including renewals and retention. So she owns customer success at this point too. So Kathleen, what do you think about, I guess, assuming that it means the person that runs CS, sales, and marketing? What did you learn from maybe what Latney said or from Andrea said? And what do you think the pros and cons are of, somebody moving up through sales and becoming a CRO versus moving up through marketing and becoming a CRO?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting just listening to you all talk about the evolution of the term because, like AJ, I started hearing about it in like the 2010s. And I think in the beginning, it was really, people were talking about it as though it was just sales and marketing. And it has certainly expanded to encompass CS. And I think that reflects in many ways the way we've all begun to think about the full revenue lifecycle. Like there's more of an appreciation now for the post-sale funnel than I think there has been in the past. And so the way we define CRO has evolved in tandem with that. And so, then of course it begs the question, like who should own it as we're talking about. And I think from the perspective of the CMOs, the conversation was really that there's no reason the CMO shouldn't own it. And I think like Latney, for example, has been evangelizing for years that CMOs should stop calling themselves chief marketing officers and call them chief market officers.
Market officers.
Yeah. And I think that was like an interesting precursor to her taking on this role because she's always seen her role, and I don't want to speak for her, but I've heard her talk about this a lot. She's always seen her role as being like the person that owns the perspective of where the company fits within the broader market. Which to me, like when we think about this new definition of CRO, it's almost like you could substitute and call it the chief go-to-market officer. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if that's like the direction we're heading with this evolving term, because effectively they own most of the go-to-market organization. And I think she was positioning herself for that because she was looking at her role as not just marketing, as like market positioning and go-to-market strategy. And she worked really closely with sales. She also had some experience in sales, which I think helps.
That's a huge one.
I think she started in sales originally.
She did. Yeah. And,
which is funny because I don't know when she started her career, but sales reps have this weird thing where if you haven't carried a bag ever in your career, there's a credibility and trust issue.
Yeah.
But it could have been like 30 years ago or whatever. It's like, oh, you had a quota at one time. You're good. You knew how to do it. But otherwise, it's like you have to like earn your stripes by carrying that bag to your sellers.
Yeah. And I do think like I've always said every marketer at some point in their career should work in sales. And I had to do it I kind of had to do it when I owned my own business because we were small enough that I was also washing all the dishes in the kitchen at the time. But when I sold my company, I spent 6 months in a purely sales role and I definitely developed a different level of empathy. So I do think for marketers, like there's something to that if you want to go this path to like finding opportunities to lean in on sales. And this was some of what Latney talked about because her point was like, any one of you, if you're a good CMO, can become a good CRO. You just like, in her talk, there were 4 key things that she said marketers really need to master. One of those was being the steward of what the ICP is, both today and in the future. So like at a strategic level, really taking ownership of that. The second was pipeline ownership and forecasting, knowing how to forecast and committing to a number. The third was leading BDRs. And the fourth was really having ops chops and understanding how data plays into the way you orchestrate wins. And then I think she had some other advice around like, we all get presented with opportunities in our career. And if you have these opportunities, things like owning pricing and packaging or owning deal desk or enablement or PLG, like you should say yes, because these are all chances for you to learn new things, to demonstrate that you can take ownership of them, and they position you well for a potential move into CRO.
Which is interesting, I think, on that point. The audience that she was speaking to were very executive, I would assume, and there are people that have said yes. I would wonder if that feedback is getting to like the director level. Like those are the people that need to hear that exact feedback of saying yes to things. And so,
where do we think a person who has a greater likelihood of success, a VP of marketing becoming CRO and inheriting sales, or a VP of sales becoming CRO and inheriting marketing? I will lead and say, I don't know if this is controversial or not, and maybe it's specific to Andrea and Latney as 2 examples, but I would trust a marketer to run sales more than I would trust a salesperson to run marketing. That's my
interesting.
Take.
I like that answer.
I think as you guys were talking, I was realizing that the CRO role has a lot to do with the move to the cloud, because the cloud enabled SaaS, which made technology companies recurring revenue businesses. So we went from a world of chief sales officer, chief marketing officer, chief customer officer, to one where we had to create one role that oversees everything. And theoretically, that sounds really good. But what we've learned is that it's not easy to find people that are capable of managing all of those functions. And in our slice of the world, you rarely see a CRO who manages all 3 functions. But I think it's worth highlighting that this dynamic is different based on the stage of the business. So if you look at businesses that are 100 million plus in revenue and ARR, they usually have a president or a president of field operations. That is effectively what we think of the CRO role. That is what that is. Kevin from Clary, who we interviewed a few weeks ago, that is what he is, right? All of go-to-market, from pre to post, the CMO to CRO to CC, all report into him. And so that role does exist. It might not be called a CRO, but it comes into play much later. What we've noticed is earlier on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you're a early stage startup, you don't have C-level executives. You have these frontline heads of sales, head of marketing, head of CS reporting into the CEO playing the CRO role. And then usually at the Series B stage, you start bringing in these C-level executives and running these searches. What we've learned is most founders, their comfort is having a CRO who does sales and post sales. They never even think about the marketing component. They're like, marketing is its own different beast. We're not going to give a person who hasn't done marketing. And we also don't want to look at a person coming from marketing who hasn't handled sales and hasn't handled post sales. We don't want to take these risks. We need a person. We can connect the dots between sales and CS. It seems like it overlaps enough for us to say, if a person hasn't handled CS, let's give them CS. We think they can figure it out. There's enough proof of people having done that in the past, but they never want to take the risk of getting somebody to learn on their dime. There's just too much risk there for them.
But, Asid, on this, to Sam's point about like CMO to CRO, is that because the skill sets that we require and that we value have changed so much more over the last several years? Like, I would say that you hear much, like marketing has much more of this like customer journey focus that we've seen in PLG. We've seen,
I think
just
PLG
like
is
the
interesting.
things we care about, like brand and product marketing. Those things have been valued over a one-to-one sales process where a rep is talking to someone.
Which is why it's stage dependent though, right? Or type of company also comes into play then. So as we're talking through this, it's like, if you're a PLG company, you're going to have a little bit more comfort with the CMO managing all of it than if you're a sales-led growth company. company. Like if you have an enterprise sales cycle and you're Series B, there's no world in which your commercial leader hasn't managed and built a sales org before. It's not just that have them done some sort of sales. They have to have done sales in your environment where you're not selling against status quo, where they've dealt with these deal dynamics, they have stage appropriate experience. Like you're trying to reduce risk so fundamentally because you don't have many at-bats with these roles, right? Like the reality is if you're in a category war, if you're really like in a category war, if you misfire on a C-level go-to-market hire, you might give up that category lead and never catch up ever again. So people are trying their best to reduce risk. And I don't think in a sales-led growth company at that Series A, Series B, Series C stage even, you're going to see people that are going to give...
push on that for a second, Asid. Can you give an example of where that's actually happened? What you've seen? Where C-level, there was a company that was out in front. They made a bad C-level exec hire, and the company fell wildly behind.
I can't name companies here because that would be really hurting them. But 100%.
Sales talent agency, they made a devastating hire.
They hired a CEO one time, Sam, I think.
I think Asid raises a really good point, though, which is like, it depends on, it's not just stage dependent, it's motion dependent. Yeah. Like PLG, I would argue, is a great example where you should probably seriously consider having a marketer in your CRO role because it is, it is about essentially leaning heavily into inbound, leaning heavily into like you want to have a good product leader also to partner with that person. But I think that's a case where marketing could really shine. I think there are CMOs who could also lead enterprise sales organizations. And it was interesting when I raised this in the CMO channel earlier today in Pavilion, I had a really great response from Emma Clayton, who's out of London, who was like, I got to step in and comment on this. And she talked about basically why classically trained marketers are well positioned to do this because they are essentially trained to deeply understand customers and to develop strategies that are all about like responding to those customers' needs and pain points and situations, right? And so that, and I come from a management consulting background. I also did an MBA in marketing, but like it's similar to management consulting in that respect, where you're given a problem and you have to figure out how to solve it. And so I think classically trained marketers, her point was, are very well positioned to orchestrate the entire thing. But she also raised a really interesting thing, which was that only 28% of marketing leaders are really like trained in marketing. And I see that all the time. There's people who started out in something else and they went into marketing. And so like, I don't know if that's relevant or not, but I thought that was an interesting point as well of like, they come from different backgrounds. Are they really trained in that same way to deeply understand the customer and build a strategy around it? Question mark. But the other point she made, which I thought was great, and this is why some marketers, I think, want to tear their hair out when people assume that only somebody with a sales background can become a CRO, which is that often when you put somebody with sales training in that role and they oversee marketing, what you end up with is a very short-term focus because sales by necessity has to be short-term focused. It's about feeding the beast, right? Like we need more leads, we need more pipeline, and good marketing has to balance short and long-term focus. You have to invest in brand. You have to have that long planning horizon. And so I think this is why so many, like Latney even said, she's like, until I took the CRO job, I used to say over my dead body would I report to a CRO. And it's because I think a lot of marketers feel like their long-term investments all get quashed when they report to somebody who comes from that sales perspective. And that is really detrimental. I mean, it drives up your CAC because you're constantly needing to invest in feeding this short-term, the short-term machine. When really, if you invest for the long term, you're building a foundation and your CAC should, over time, in some respects, get more manageable. Sam, I know you think CAC always gets higher, but like, I think the point is CAC would be even higher if you weren't making these investments. It would be disproportionately higher.
I think the point you made is a really important point. I think it's also fair to call out that this VP of sales to CRO transition isn't smooth sailing in the ecosystem, right? The average tenure of a CRO is 1.8 years. Obviously, it's not driven by any one particular variable, but
isn't the CMO lower now than that?
I don't think it's lower. Last time I looked, they were all
down.
the same. Has it gone down further? Could have. Kath?
Well, I know the CMO role was going down over the last couple of
I mean,
years.
anybody in a go-to-market function is
tough.
very, very volatile, particularly over the last
Right.
couple of years.
I think one of the major reasons why there's a failure rate between sales to CRO is this time horizon factor, where you're trained to think at a month and a quarter at a time. I was talking to Carl Norton; he made this point to me, and now you have to start thinking about a year and longer, and it's really tough. Habits are. It's easier to break a habit that you know is hurting you, like smoking. It's much harder to break habits that have made you $1 million or helped you buy your house, right? Those are the hard ones to break. So this has helped them be successful, and now they need to completely change how they look at the world. The P&L fluency stuff is also not simple to pick up, right? Like, it's not like you can just take a course and immediately you're black belt at it. It takes a while, and that's something that they really struggle with as well. So the sales to CRO is a tough transition as well. Kathleen, do you think that there's why do you think it's so hard for us to see people that have led post sales to be able to do all of this? Because I've seen one-off examples of people that have become the ultimate go-to-market leader. In these cases, they were actually called the CRO, but they came from customer success into it. What was interesting about their paths was there were two people I can think of. They both managed companies at 100 million in ARR. They were both in those companies for 10 plus years. And so maybe the second part of the question is, or maybe the more interesting question is, for these type of transitions, CMO to CRO, CCO to CRO, is it more likely to happen if you spend a long time within a company versus when you're going to a new role outside?
I mean, I definitely think that being within the company and getting promoted from within is probably easier because, to your point, Asid, there's like a risk management element where, at least in that case, the CEO or the founder is dealing with a known quantity, right? There's a trust that's already been established, which I think is so important to making that leap and believing that somebody could change roles and be successful. So Latney has been at Sixth Sense for several years and now has taken on the CRO role. I don't think it happens in every case, but I think it's much more likely because of that trust factor.
The other side to that, though, is what if you have to pull back and it's not working out? You've given a leader that you trust heavily in a new responsibility. How do you pull back on that?
You fire them.
Yeah, I think you fire them.
You get promoted to the point of incompetence and then you're out, right? Like that's
It's a Peter Principle situation? Is that what we're
probably.
Yeah.
Or I've seen companies that, I mean, honestly, create roles like chief strategic officer,
Chief
chief evangelist.
I love
Yeah.
that.
Evangelist.
I think to your point, Kathleen, and also to AJ's point, like I think the reason that we've seen on the margin, or at least we can recall people that are making it from CMO to CRO more recently, is because of this emphasis on go-to-market, this idea and a broader understanding that there is it's what we talked about last week. Last week we talked about how the classic salesperson was driving up. The classic sales leader was only focusing, when we talked about Mark Hasselglow's LinkedIn post, the classic sales leader is only focusing on new business, doing whatever it takes to hit the number. Extremely short-term focus, but with a high sense of urgency, not really understanding that recurring revenue is driven by recurring impact, as our friend Jocko would say, and that there needs to be a comprehensive view that aligns the customer from the minute that they hit the website, pre-sale, to the minute to 5 years later when they've renewed 4 subsequent times after the first sale. And I think, to your point, Asid, the sales leaders that have emerged or come up, through the ranks over the last couple of years are they've only been taught that you got to hit the number, you got to hit the number, you got to hit the number. And the number's always been a new business number.
Yeah.
And so they have now and that's, I think if we were to like stereotype, like what's the risk of sales into CRO is this inordinate short-term focus. Yeah. You never were it was really that, and especially it's like you worked at Salesforce, you worked at Slack, like you were given a great product, you had product market fit, and really your expertise was rallying the troops, building a class of frontline managers that could have really good in-depth one-on-ones and pipeline reviews, and getting really, really good at forecasting. And I think the thing that happens in marketing is that you have to have this multidisciplinary approach because marketing is demand gen, marketing is brand, marketing is content, marketing is still how much pipeline did you give me and how many leads, but it's also what does the website say and what is the logo and what's the color palette that we're using. And so I think marketers do have a longer term focus. And I think exactly to your point about CCO, I think the time horizon is the biggest question mark. It's what is the hesitation about promoting a marketer to CRO? It's that they've fought so many battles with the CRO about the CRO being short-term focused that they've overcompensated, and everything is 6 to 12 months. And they don't understand that we still do have to hit the number. We still do. And on the sales side, it's great that you can get all these salespeople to be really motivated and energized, but you don't understand how much money we're spending. You don't understand unit economics. You don't understand what's going to deliver retention. You're not focused. You don't even have a point of view on marketing, so that you can't really coach the marketing department if you own marketing on what they're supposed to do or what the message needs to be, unless you're the founder like AJ, in which case you're a great head of marketing and a great CMO. But so I think and then the CCO, I can imagine being even more to the extreme on constantly fighting about retention, constantly talking about ICP, to the extent that everything is like 12-month cohorts and doesn't have that, we got to do this today. And I think the biggest benefit of the sales to CRO track is that sense of urgency and that's why, who are the two people that we're talking about? Latney and Andrea. And Andrea was telling me that at Help Scout, she's like, I just talked to everybody. We have a no miss mentality. They better not effing miss this number. I'm going to kick their ass. Latney, the same thing. Latney has a number in front of her. We all know that Latney will do whatever it takes to hit that number. And the concern on putting marketers into the CRO is, do they care to that extent that Latney and Andrea do? And of course, the concern that we have putting a VP of sales into the CRO is, do they have any friggin' clue how to run the actual business? Or are they only just thrown money at a problem and hope something comes out on the other end and never been accountable for the result? And that's why on the margin, I'll wrap it up, but on the margin, I'd rather have Latney and Andrew. I'd rather bring somebody from marketing with the sense of urgency, because I think that's easier to find than a sales leader that has a multidisciplinary approach to the member journey. As
wait, hold on. I have one question. I got a question. Austin, I have a question. We've all this such a great topic. Do we have to change the name of the podcast from Topline to Bottom Line? Is that what we're saying?
I don't know.
Sam,
that's a groaner. That's a dad joke.
Do you think it would be, in that transition, how important is it for the marketer to have had a revenue target prior to becoming a CRO? Because I would feel uneasy.
Is there a marketer in the world that doesn't have a revenue target?
There are many in the ecosystem that are still the old school market.
I mean, they should. This is another topic of discussion at every CMO meeting I am at. It's like, you need to own a number. You need to own a revenue number.
Yeah, were they working for like chemical companies? Like, I don't.
How many brochures? We printed 24 brochures last week.
No, MQLs and like the old school was very much this, right? Like you had these indicators that you were measured against, and then sales had the revenue target, and then
I don't know if that's true. I mean, Kathleen has the greatest.
The industry was. It's very
Kathleen
much the way.
Has the greatest autobiography in her background, Ogilvy on Advertising. That was printed in 1985. And that guy, you read his book, his old school, he is very, very focused on
an agency. It's different. Like, I'm talking about CMOs and SaaS didn't always have revenue targets. And now it's been moving into this direction where more and more have those revenue targets. And I think that if I am hiring a CRO, I would like to look at a CMO for that position because of the potential advantages that role has. But I would feel uneasy if that person had never had a revenue target before. I think that cohort gets disqualified because it's too much of a jump. I also think that the thing that the customer success people struggle with, Sam, as you were talking, it came to mind, is, can they create a spark? Like, the thing that with salespeople is they can create a spark out of somewhere, right? Like, that's the thing that's always the question mark with the CS person is, will you be able to manage creating spots so that you can do your magic later on? And that's a big question mark.
Well, Sam introduced the third component here, the CCO, Chief Customer Officer, right? And at HubSpot, Rob Giglio, who David O'Brien 2 weeks ago said, he left and he's now the CCO at Canva. He had the CRO reported to him.
And Yamini, as the CEO, was the chief customer officer
at Dropbox as well. So she's moved from Dropbox to HubSpot.
But there's a caveat there, AJ. Those roles are more like the president of field operations that Kevin is than they are traditional CCO roles. Like, this is where ecosystem. That's why I say we're in the middle of a live experiment, because there are no standards here. Like, it's not like there's one way of doing this the way there is for so many other functions. And so I think the better title for what his role was president of field operations or president. I think that role is the more traditional role where all of these go-to-market functions roll over. This was not a traditional chief customer officer role.
So I got to give a plug, because at our CRO summit in Boston in June, one of the keynotes is Allison Metcalf, who is the chief revenue officer at Cloudinary. And she was previously chief revenue officer at Demandbase, but she comes from a customer success background. She was VP of customer success at LiveRamp. She was senior director of customer success at Demandbase. Before that, she was at Salesforce in customer success. So she is exactly what we're talking about. And this is what she's going to talk about at the CRO summit. I was really excited to have her come in, because there aren't too many of her, and she's at a pretty large sized company, having come from other large companies and really navigated this transition and done it successfully. Now she's in her second CRO role, having come from CS. So it's going to be really interesting to hear what she has to say.
Kathleen, would you, if you're CEO, how do you feel about what Asad said, that he wouldn't hire a CMO unless they owned a number? Like, what's your perspective on should CMOs own a number at this point?
I mean, what I'm seeing is that most companies aren't hiring CMOs if they haven't owned a number in the past, let alone like considering putting them in CRO roles. And I think this is where, being in B2B tech is interesting, because I think in some ways we're very much at the forefront. And in B2B tech, I think most companies, especially if they're VC or PE backed, someone would never get hired into a CMO role if they couldn't say, I've owned a number before and here's how I performed against it. They'd get kicked down the road.
Kathleen, should we change the name of CRO school at Pavilion to GTM school?
Ooh, good question.
Thank you.
I perhaps think maybe no. I think maybe we should create something new that encompasses all that is in CRO, CMO, and CCO school. Because
maybe a GTM mastery certificate, and you have to take all 3 courses.
I want to know. I want to know when CEO school is coming out. I need to take CEO school.
So we talked about this, and I told Sam, there's not a world in which we can create one CEO school that would satisfy all CEOs. I think
really hard.
I think we could create something for early stage first-time CEOs, but I mean, can you imagine putting the whole range of...
I have the angle for you. For the people like us who come from a commercial background, because there are these unique advantages that you have as a CEO coming from a commercial background. Like AJ and I were discussing this earlier today. Like, one of them is that we all have plans, but so many of the problems that we solve are very dynamic in nature, and you have to be very comfortable like making decisions on the fly on really important, stressful situations. I think people that come from this commercial background into a CEO role are very comfortable doing that. And I talk to my friends that are technical founder CEOs, and they're so much more used to this roadmap and sticking to the plan that they have a very tough time making these decisions on the fly. So I think it's an interesting track into the CEO role, and you could make something for people that are coming from that.
My calendar is wildly too busy to lead half of the sessions anyway, so I can't.
It's full of webinars.
Oh my God, we didn't. I think we're gonna focus on go to market. I think, and just be the place for people to learn go to market. That's why I was asking. Kathleen, it's been awesome having you on Topline. You're doing a great job. You did a great job emceeing CMO Summit. Thank you for your contributions and for all your hard work.
Thanks for having me. It is an honor.
Thanks, Kathleen.
See you at CRO Summit in June.
Bye
6th.
all.
Calling all CROs and sales executives, join us on June 6th in Boston for Pavilion CRO Summit. Unlock new perspectives and tactics that can help you take a new approach to growth, understand your unit economics, and align with key stakeholders to elevate your business and your career. Register now at joinpavilion.com/CRO Summit. Use the code TOPLINE to receive 20% off your ticket.
Okay, and we're back. Acid.
That was interesting. That was it's a good conversation to be had, because as we were talking about this yesterday, it's just wild that there are no standards yet in the ecosystem, so we can help drive the conversation and establish some clear thinking around the various tracks, the pros and cons, how to hedge against them when you hire people from one track versus the other. All of these things are still to be figured out. It's just wild to see how early in the process we all really are.
I know. I thought you'd think we were further along, and then we still have no clear definition of what the CRO is supposed to own.
Yeah.
And it really, to me, Jocko said it at our conference in Nashville, GTM 2023 last year. He said, this is a phase shift. And I still think we're still in the shift of, okay, we're not going to have growth at any cost anytime soon. We need to build good businesses. How are we going to do that? And what bubbles up is you need alignment. You need alignment so that because to the point of the conversation about Mark and the salesperson, so that the ICP is well defined, so that you can drive the right experience and be very clear about what to expect, but still sign up lots of people.
Yeah.
But those people need to be retained, and you need to deliver recurring impact. And so it starts from the moment they hit the website to 5 renewals later, or however long they're going to be a customer. And that requires a broad perspective across all of these different disciplines that have historically been pretty siloed, where the sales department was the king department or the queen department, and everything else was subordinate to it, which is it's still interesting to me that that CRO is presumed to be a higher title than CMO, but I guess, revenue is more all-encompassing than marketing.
Austin's point, I was just talking to the president of Seismic, Hayden, it was that exact role that Austin described as like the field manager. So it's really, really interesting. Big scale company too, of course.
Okay, so we have something else that's very interesting to talk about.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
I wish Latney wasn't closing out the quarter, because we could have gotten.
Well, she has to come and talk with us about this stuff at some point, but we don't do this ourselves in the meantime. So a week ago, a friend of the pod, Adam Robinson from retention.com, made a post on LinkedIn in which he shared that he'd bought Sixth Sense's solution for $18,000 for the year so that they could compare the results to Clearbit and their own person-level identity tool that they recently released for free into the market. Now, the post he made was because apparently Sixth Sense had told him that their renewal would cost $55,000 instead of the $18,000 he was originally paying, which is a 3x increase on their original contract. He claimed that they're doing this because they're scared of him figuring out how bad their data and intent signals are, and they're scared of the growth of Adam's free tool, and so they're trying to act accordingly. Now, that post did well. Adam spoke about LinkedIn engagement when he was on the pod recently, but that post did well. The one after really blew up. So the one after blew up because it's the one of him posting the cease and desist that Sixth Sense sent him 6 days later or 7 days later. Which is wild. Basically, they sent him a letter demanding that he take down the original post, issue a public apology, and here's the wild part, tag all 463 commenters in the apology. Adam did what anyone who knows Adam would know that he's going to do, which is he posted the cease and desist, and he said, there's no world in which I'm going to take down the original post, but here's a new one, and that one went viral. So they got the opposite of what they were looking for. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you actually click into the cease and desist, it's there. You can see that Sixth Sense has a point in what they're saying, which is that we didn't come at you with just a blind a 3x increase on price. It was for a very different solution, more seats, more credits. Like that was the conversation, dude. It wasn't what you're making it out to be. But if you were to look at this from a PR perspective, this is as much of a blunder as one can make. That I believe if Sixth Sense's legal team had coordinated with the go-to-market team on that letter, then people like Lackney would have said, "How are you going to ask him to tag 463 commenters in this? That's ridiculous." But they didn't. We know a lot of great companies that do silly things sometimes. This was one of them. So curious how you guys think about this. Who's right? What's playing out over here? What's this game? Like, Sam, what's the game that's been played here?
The game that's being played is that there's no such thing as bad publicity, and Adam is a freaking genius marketer. So that's thing number one. And I think based on what, you click through the cease and desist letter and you read Exhibit A, which is a screenshot of the proposal that they sent to him. And it seems to be, although he has some response I was looking for, couldn't find it, that he's somewhat misrepresenting the situation, at least if you click through the cease and desist letter. He has some explanation, and we owe it to him to find it somewhere. But I think what he was saying is that like they pushed 55 and then they renegotiated and came back with a lower offer, and that's the screenshot that they use. That might be what they're saying. Anyway, the game is very simple. It's marketing, and he is a brilliant marketer. And what do you need to be a brilliant marketer in this modern world, or at least to be this kind of brilliant marketer? You need to not give an F.
Yeah.
You need, I think it's the funny thing about lawyers is, they solve for the 1% outcome. Their job is not, mean like what's the average outcome. Their job is what's the extreme, what's the 3 standard deviation outcome. Let me make sure that doesn't happen. And in this case, to your point, it seems like it just seems so tone deaf to send this letter, but because who cares anyway? Because he's just yes, he's got 77,000 followers. But nobody knows who Adam Robinson is. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
And now many, many more people will. He will get many, many more people for his individual, what do they call it? Not company level identity, but individual level identity. By the way, all of this is like massive GDPR violation, can't operate in Europe, super sketchy in some ways because it de-anonymizes website visitors and gives you their contact information. And then you can build AI workflows or just workflows to like immediately email somebody that wasn't even trying to give you their email address, which is super weird. But putting all of that aside, it's all just marketing for his business. And the question, of course, today me and Alec were teaching our sold out LinkedIn brand building course to 35 amazing, GLG and Pavilion members. And we were talking about, well, what do you need to do this? Well, you need to be willing to be Howard Stern. You need to be willing to make enemies, and you need to be willing, this cease and desist letter, if there's legs to it, he may owe lots of money. Like, I appreciate that he's rich. I appreciate that he was a trader or wherever, but there's a court of public opinion and there's the actual court. Trump's in court right now, and he can't do whatever he wants to do because laws matter in this world. And yes, you can win the public debate, but you might lose in many other meaningful financial ways. Now, I don't know that the lawyers did the math on the expected value to the point. So maybe my guess is still Adam ends up winning overall. And my guess is that the lawyers skulk away with their tails between their legs, but that may not happen. But I guess the thing, as I think about it, because I'm looking at it, he started doing this and I'm at 86,000 followers and he's at 77,000, but he was at 20,000 when I was at 60,000. He's gaining way more than me. And why is that? It's because first of all, his stuff is just better, right? He's just got more time,
it's
or
more
he's figured out how
antagonizing.
Well, but it's also better. I mean, it's interesting in a way that some of my stuff is a little generic, but it's also when he was talking about it, he's talking about on our show about the team finding out stuff about retention.com from LinkedIn. And his point is, I'm all in on this. It's what I just remember watching Private Parts, the movie about Howard Stern. And he said, like, I cannot, if I compromise, I lose everything. It has to be as much me as possible. And I think what we're seeing with Adam is that is definitely a winning strategy if you don't care about the repercussions. I can't emulate him as much as I have strong opinions on a wide variety of stuff. And why can't I emulate him, or why do I believe that I can't emulate him? I probably could have emulated him maybe from the very beginning if I was a total but if I was a total jerk on LinkedIn from the beginning. And so the people that wanted to join Pavilion knew that, and we were all aligned talking about member
sharp, Sam. Like when you started Revenue Collective, I remember you were very against VCs and CEOs.
Very against CEOs joining. That's for sure. I heard that from so many people, by the way. Oh, Sam's never going to talk to you. You're a CEO.
I remember that there were certain clear groups of here are the enemies that together have colluded to make the lives of CROs really, really horrible. And so this is a group.
Well, but CROs. To the point now, now where am I today? I still have strong opinions. I still believe in the fundamental ideas behind it. I never thought VC was bad. I thought the growth expectations weren't aligned. I think most companies shouldn't take VC because they're not going to be they're not going to be the rocket ships that need rocket fuel. But my point is, I do have a community of 10,000 people at this point. And yeah, am I willing to alienate a third of them or half of them? Am I willing to alienate 6 Sense? 6 Sense is a big sponsor of Pavilion. I can't write that post that Adam wrote. Maybe that makes me conflicted. I probably don't even agree with it as strongly as he agrees with it. He's like deep in the weeds on this stuff. My point is that if you want to be, it's a very clear strategy, which is to be as controversial as possible. But it's authentic to him. We saw that when he was on the show.
Yeah.
And it's hard to replicate. Just like it's that, and it's the thing that will bubble up from AI. From an AI world, the thing that will bubble up is strong points of views authentically delivered.
I think that's actually a really important point that people are not understanding about where AI is going, is that if this way to stand out will be personality, point of views, sharpness. Just a quick question on that. Like, is this life cycle dependent? Like, AJ, when you look at Adam's strategy, do you think Adam's current strategy, or even Sam back in the day where there were clear friends and non-friends, let's call them, does that work well at the onset, but as you mature, then you kind of get, because Adam's tool is making no revenue. It's a brand new tool, right? So he's very much where Sam was in his journey many years ago, where there were the enemies and the non-enemies, that type of thing. Do you think it's life cycle dependent?
Well, I'm taking the other side of this a little bit. I actually disagree with Sam on some of this, and here's why. I've gone through plenty of cease and desists, and I was telling you all. What did you say, Sam? I ignored it.
No, I didn't say anything. I just like that you've gone through plenty of cease and desists. That's awesome.
I have gone through cease and desist for hiring from people from a company. When TrendKite was growing really fast, we hired from Signpost, Andrea's old company. We got cease and desist from there. I've gotten cease and desist from my old company, Meltwater, who we were on the radar, but we were competing directly against. And then we ourselves had an issue where they were, Meltwater was actually accessing our product. And we had to actually get the FBI involved in this. And this was a really big deal. And I'm sharing this for the first time. This is like 10 years ago. So maybe I'm going to get another cease and desist after this.
Statute of limitations.
Cease and desist.
Yeah, statute of limitations, I'm sure.
I wonder if they ever just send a cease letter. They're like, it feels like desist is a bit redundant.
But my point, to quote the great Sam Jacobs, my point is this. It's not about the cease and desist. It's about the distraction. And here's the thing. Adam is running a real company with real people. And as Sam, you said it yourself, they're finding about company information on LinkedIn. If you were an a-hole,
you're upping your game in every way.
You talked about people joining Pavilion as community members, but what about employees? Do people want to come work for you as an a-hole? No, of course not. That's the way more important aspect here. And I get that Adam has done a great job, and you're right. He's a better marketer than any of us on this call. And so I have to trust him on this, that he knows what he's doing. But the thing is, if I'm an employee at a company and I'm seeing this like fight, I'm like, oh, 6 Sense is, they're probably doing 100 million plus in revenue.
I think they're doing 200.
They're like have way more resources to make this a real problem and a real distraction in the court of law that you said. Do I want to really be dragged into this as an employee and working in this company? And that's a real question.
But I think...
Can I have a follow-up? Can I ask a question to AJ? AJ, did you ever not cease and desist when you got a cease and desist?
No, of course not. But
I didn't. You ceased and desisted every time.
No. I've always. Yes, I did. For hiring from Signpost, we took 3 people, and I never took another person. Wow. But we took all the best people. So I did stop. Yes,
that's fun. That's interesting. But then sometimes you ignore it.
Yeah, there were Meltwater's ones we ignored. Yeah.
Cool. What were you going to say, Austin?
I was just going to say, I think on the internal side, it can work in both directions. I think there's some people that get very energized working for an organization that has an enemy. And I think painting an enemy is a really interesting strategy, not just from a go-to-market perspective, but internal energy, right? Like Uber had an external enemy. Even right now, when we saw Apple release the Vision Pro, Mark Zuckerberg came out with an entire video explaining why his product was way better than their product. Like, I think people in organizations get energized when they feel that they're doing something for the greater good, and there's an enemy out there that they're taking off their position that they don't deserve to be in right now. So I don't know internally if this is going to be any damage to him, but it can become a distraction. Like if SitSense decides that they've got a real case here and they point all their resources to make trouble for him, it can be a distraction. I do think, though, that Adam seems to be the type of guy that he does things like this, but I would assume he's actually gotten opinions on this before doing it. Like, I actually think that he's not just shooting from the hip here. Like,
you think he talked to a lawyer?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's sharp. Like, he invests in things. Like, if you think about it, like even his social media stuff, like he doesn't do things. He doesn't play small. Like, he goes for it. Like, he'll get the right setup. He'll try the video vlog thing. Like, I think he invests time and energy to do things in a certain way. And so it wouldn't be ridiculous for me to think that he's gotten a lawyer's opinion before posting the cease and desist. Maybe not the first post, but the cease and desist, 100% he would have gotten.
The 4D chess here is Topline should send him a cease and desist.
We should send ourselves a cease and desist. We're not ceasing, we're desisting.
Okay, so any other comments on that, or we move on to the last piece?
Honestly, the main feeling I have watching Adam in public is jealousy. So envy. Like, I hear you. I think AJ made a great point that, like, do you really want to work for, I'm not saying he's a jerk, but, you know, does it matter? And also, but there's envy. I have envy around, like, exactly kind of what you're saying, Asid. Like, did I become too political? Like, do you lose? How far can you take a single enemy that you just are relentless about focusing on? Maybe I should never have started CEO Pavilion. Maybe I should never have let CEOs into, and maybe I should never, but you can't go down. I don't know. That's what I'm thinking as you're talking, which is like, I envy the clarity, because it's cool to see, because it's also clear that it didn't take him but a second. I mean, I don't think he thought too much about posting that cease and desist. Yeah. I think he got it. He's like, oh, this is going to be awesome.
We should take like the top 10 Elon Musk quotes from last year and like go through that, and like we could have a whole episode debate on this clarity piece of it, of like he's true to himself. Can't fault the guy for that.
Maybe that's the big thing, that like to be able to do well in business, you also have to be really authentic to yourself. And I think like most of the time when you see people that are uber successful, they don't become really successful trying to be somebody else. They just lean into themselves and they figure out a path being true to their own person. They up-level skills, they up-level all those other things, but they stay authentic to the type of person they are, because otherwise it's really hard to have follow through, right? Like if we're not like Adam, you do the first thing, the second one keeps you up at night. Like you made the first post, anyone can make that first post. It wasn't that crazy. It didn't deserve a cease and desist. That was silly on SitSense's part. The second post, that would keep me up at night. I'm like, is that the right move or not? And so for me, that's just not the type of leader I can be. I don't think it's good or bad. I think it's just he's figured out that you have to be very authentic in this type of a game. And I admire that part.
I admire that too.
Okay, so the last thing, we only have a few minutes to touch on this, but it is meaningful, which is that non-competes are done. Basically, the FTC came out and said they've been working on this for some time, but the final rule has come out, which basically means that non-competes have been banned nationwide, protecting the fundamental freedom of workers to change jobs, increase innovation, and foster new business formation. It's actually really interesting on the new business formation part. They believe that 8,500 new startups would be created every year once these non-competes are banned. I thought that was quite interesting. This will lead to a 2.7% per year growth in new business formulation. It'll increase the average wage for workers by an additional $524 per year, and is expected to lower healthcare costs by $194 billion over the next decade. I have no idea how that happens. It does exclude senior executives right now who already had a non-compete. And senior executives are defined as people that make $151,164. I have no idea how they got to that calculation. It's so specific. And they've given advice on how to work around this stuff. They've said, listen, we understand what non-competes were trying to achieve. They were just really bad at achieving it. So if you want that type of protection, NDAs and non-solicitations are way better. Sam, you were the guy who was, standing up for the executives in the market, and non-competes were one of the things that I think used to annoy a lot of the go-to-market executives because it has huge implications for them. What are your thoughts on this?
I support the FTC, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think that it's really hard to tell somebody that they're not allowed. In some ways, it makes sense, but there wouldn't have been a trend kite if they were aggressively enforced, right? I'm sure Meltwater did try to shut you down. That was the point of some of the cease and desists. I think that I understand
also
why.
California, I wasn't actually as worried about it because California's been pretty progressive about this. And so that was one area where I was like,
Asia's had the best career. Like, I love Asia's career. It's like full of
it's not over yet.
Yeah.
You just put me down, Austin. Thanks.
What a career you've had. Now you're off. We're going to put you at the pasture, little guy. You're a good little guy. I just think it's hard to tell people you spent all your time learning some expertise or some industry. You're not allowed to deploy that expertise. It just feels a little counterintuitive. And I love the point that they made about economic growth, because they're right. There's lots of people that you became an expert. Now, does that mean that, when there's some people that left Pavilion to start communities, and I still think it's hard to execute. So I don't, and they were doing communities in different areas. I guess I'm supportive of the FTC. AJ, what do you think?
I'm supportive of this. I've seen this happen firsthand. I had a friend that was not a senior executive, but a middle level manager at a bigger company, went off to start her own agency, and it was starting to flourish. She got a cease and desist. She took a back seat in the business and actually was not involved for the year. And the company started to really flourish. And then she tried to jump back in, and it caused so much issue and heartache when she did it. And that 2.7% or whatever number you cited, I've seen that. That's a real thing. It's a real number. And I think it's a little bit going to be interesting. We've seen the Google and Apple fights over the years. It's why California, I think, has been on the more progressive side of this. I get a little bit of heartburn thinking about senior executives that know IP, cap table, even cap table information, and going and working for a direct competitor, especially because we've talked about it in this episode of how competitive some industries and markets are. I could see this being a little bit like the NIL or the free agency world, where you have the highest dollar and highest bidder, and you're taking it for company or corporate espionage becoming a real thing.
I think that's a good point.
It needs to be seen.
A good point.
For go-to-market executives, whenever we place them and they're worried about their non-compete, so whenever somebody calls me and is worried about a non-compete, I tell them not to worry. Doesn't really matter. We figured something out a few years ago. We were recruiting from this organization that always used to send a letter to people when they left, reminding them of their obligations. And so we were recruiting somebody for an executive role from that company into a direct competitor. And they had just sent a letter to that competitor for some other hire that they'd made. So the competitor was scared as well. And so now everyone's scared. And so what we did was we went into case law. So we looked at where's this company registered, what are all the states where they have a registration done. We looked at all the case law over there, and we found that this company, which was a large enterprise company, had never litigated. They always sent letters to scare, but they never litigated. And they never litigated because if you go to courts, it's usually for go-to-market execs, it's less than a 50-50. Most likely, the courts are going to rule in the favor of the go-to-market exec. And so you go to court, you lose, it becomes public record, and the psychological strength of your non-compete goes away. And so we always just used to say there's very little chance this goes to litigation. And so don't worry about it. I like that it's drawn for go-to-market execs, but I do worry for technical leaders. I think there is where the challenges arise. But there'll be workarounds. There'll be workarounds like these NDAs and side deals that you have to sign for some type of financial upside. For the company to feel that they are protected. If you're coming in as a CTO and you don't have a lens on their roadmap and these edgy things they're doing, you'd be scared if that person can just pick up and go to the next, Series B company in that category and do everything there. So I do think it's a bit scary for them. AJ, have you ever reminded somebody of a non-compete clause that left your organization? Like, have you ever been the company reminding people?
I mean, I've been reminded of it multiple times on my part.
Really?
I think so. Like when I left Trendkite and stepped down, it was a very serious conversation.
Really?
And non-compete for two reasons: on the cease and desist side for pooling talent, and non-compete of just being really careful. But I had a very vested. It was strange because it was coming from the board. I had a very vested interest in Trendkite. So why would I go start a Trendkite? Trendkite that wouldn't make any sense. I've never reminded myself. I went through very deep into my own docs for Meltwater. I was there 5.5 years to make sure I didn't have anything signed that really limited me. The EPIIA, which we all signed, the invention agreement. That's something that I looked into very heavily. I talked to multiple lawyers about it and felt secure enough that was something. And by the time we were on the radar, which was 2 or 3 years later, it had already passed. So that was a challenge as well. But we still received the cease and desist.
Have you ever been reminded, Sam?
No, but I know GLG is pretty aggressive. They've reminded other people. And then I haven't reminded anybody about a non-compete, but I have reminded people about non-disparagement.
Non-disparagement,
yeah. Hey, if I'm paying you severance right now, you can't say mean things about me in public. I'm sorry.
Yeah, 100%.
And it worked.
But you getting paid.
Yeah.
You're getting paid severance.
Sometimes people are stupid.
You're reminding them of how to keep getting paid severance. Basically, you're
exactly.
You don't lose the severance. Get it together. You can't. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Shout outs, wins of the week.
I'll go first. So whenever there's a new acquired episode, I shout it out. It's become a little tradition, so I'm shouting it out. The latest episode, I think, should be required listening for our ecosystem because it is on Microsoft, which I think is probably one of the two most meaningful organizations in the tech ecosystem. I've probably the best go-to-market team ever created is at Microsoft. And it's just such a wealth of knowledge. Did you know that Microsoft's first round of funding was when they had 17 million in revenue, were profitable? They raised $1 million at a 20 million post. What? What is that round?
And they did it because Bill Gates didn't need the money.
He didn't need the money.
He just wanted the credibility.
He wanted the credibility, and he liked the guy. He really liked this guy that helped him make a couple of hires from Xerox. They also, when they went public for a lot less than Apple had a couple of years ago before that. But Bill Gates made statements like, a software company should always have a lower multiple than CPG companies. It's just wild to hear the history, and these people do so much work. They speak to so many people to uncover these gems, and I think everybody should go listen to it. I'm not done listening to it, but those were a few things I heard today in the gym. And so the episode's out. Everybody should go listen to it, and that is my shout out for this week.
Austin, can you drop it in the Pavilion Topline?
I will, channel? And I'll drop it once I'm done listening to it, so I can put my highlights of it as well. I'm super active in that Slack channel. I've given up on LinkedIn. I'm just in that Slack channel now. I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's where I am.
So all of Austin's followers need to go.
Yeah,
same with
Sam's.
Sam.
You miss me? Come there.
Yeah, not my 10 followers.
AJ, what's your shout out or win of the week?
I have two quick ones. First goes to Josh Gutman. And I made sure that that's the pronunciation of his name, by the way. Josh and I had a fantastic conversation. Josh is a Pavilion member. Austin knows him well, resides up north in Canada. And Josh is going through a pretty sizable business decision. And we talked twice on Saturday and Sunday for about an hour and a half total, and had just a great conversation around all things business, all things startups, the ecosystem, and some of the things he's thinking about. And so, Josh, it was great to chat with you. He's also a listener, so he'll hear this. And my second shout out goes to my mother. And the reason for this is very simple. My mom's listened to every episode, and she made it very clear when she was at our house the other day that I've never given her a shout out. I've given a shout out to my brother, to my father,
We've
to my wife,
certainly
to my
talked
kids.
about your mother a lot. We know that
But
she lives
Auntie
in
has
Kitty
never
Hawk.
received a shout out? That's
No,
wild. Bad
and
boy.
she
AJ.
said it, but then Ange backed it up, so I didn't really have a choice to
That's
be like, I was like,
crazy.
no, that's not true. So my mom, who even though she doesn't quite get all of the lingo, and certainly won't from this episode, shout out goes to her.
Yeah. Shout out. I love your mother.
Shout out. My shout outs to Latney, Conan, the CRO of 6 Cents. She couldn't make it today because she's trying to close business. She has renewals too. It's a ton of stuff, as she said. And I was texting her during the episode. We're talking about you right now in a good way. And she gave me back a heart emoji.
Mhm.
So that was nice. And then I also do want to give a shout out to our Slack channel, to the Topline channel. I as I mentioned, it's cool because every other community channel, every other area is people asking for stuff.
Yeah.
And this is one place there's nothing to ask for. It's not the right place to ask for anything, really. It's people talking about ideas. And so we had a great conversation about going from, the path to CRO in anticipation of this episode. And it really gave a lot of juice to this episode. And we had a great conversation about the Adam Robinson LinkedIn post. And it's just a really cool place. And the quality of the people that are contributing is actually very high, not actually, but is very high.
Very
and
high.
so finally, I want to give a shout out to Ryan Burke, who was chiming in on, some ideas about making it to CRO and sort of the definition of CRO and how people need to think about it. And I thought that was a great contribution. So Ryan, you remember the Boston chapter. I hope to see you at CRO Summit June 6th in Boston. But honestly, folks, if you're not in the Slack channel, you really should. It's cool. It's fun. And it's a place where we can talk about interesting go-to-market trends. And nobody's going to say, who has a playbook for an account mapping template for enterprise healthcare tech? Not that there's anything wrong with asking that question.
I'll delete those ones if they come.
So, all right, folks. Was this 54?
Yeah.
It's 54, and we didn't get to your list of grievances on AJ. You have to save them for the
I
next
don't really have
episode.
any
so-
grievances.
55.
I love you, brother. All right, folks. Listen to us on Thursday for Topline Hotline. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
And that's a wrap for today's episode, brought to you by SalesLoft. SalesLoft helps revenue teams take the right actions to close every deal with the only platform built around the seller's day. Visit salesloft.com to learn how the world's top revenue teams hit their number by using SalesLoft. Thanks for listening to Topline. New episodes come out every Sunday. If you like what you heard today, subscribe so you never miss an episode, leave a 5-star review, and share it with your friends. Don't forget to join our Topline Slack channel to connect with us and discuss the topics we cover with other listeners. Click the link in the show notes. Lastly, if you're interested in joining Pavilion, you can learn more about membership at joinpavilion.com/membership. Thanks again for listening.